A mathematical point is the simplest model for calculating psychological interaction stimulus-response. Psychological interaction is two acts, separated by a certain quantity of time. The first act is to determine the quantity of irritation. The second act is a change in the quantity of action performed. Is it a reaction to irritation or a response? The interaction is considered completed when the total quantity of reaction corresponds to the total quantity of irritation. Technically, such a mathematical point is called a machine, where an external irritation is a stimulus and a stimulation, and is called incoming information. And the reaction to irritation is a response to a stimulus, and is called a change in the amount of work performed by the executive mechanism. Any living being in psychology is a technical device that was created by someone and has some kind of power source, because the work being done and the change in the work being done are impossible without expenditure of energy. An ordinary internal combustion engine is also a machine. It also converts energy into some kind of action, that is, it also performs work that has a certain value. But a living being, like a machine, is distinguished by the ability to adjust the amount of work performed through incoming information, which is a collection of incoming data for a preset algorithm. Incoming information is an instruction to the actuator to change the magnitude of work performed. Since work is performed in a one-dimensional space, there are only two types of commands, to add or reduce relative to the actual magnitude of work being performed. In the elementary case, this is an on or off command. In a more complex case, this is the magnitude, reported to the executive mechanism, how much it is necessary to change the magnitude of work performed relative to the actual magnitude of work performed. Accordingly, the magnitude of work performed is a certain condition of the machine and the creature, which remains unchanged until there is incoming information to change its condition by a certain magnitude. Like any Newton's body, which is at rest, there is no force yet that will force it to change such a state. This value is set through incoming information, determined through the senses, or any other sensors. Accordingly, any living being in psychology is a technical device that has been created by someone and is capable of changing the quantity of work done through external irritation, that is, it is an executive mechanism that has a control system. Since sensory organs and executive mechanisms can be external to the machine, the definition of such a machine can be simplified even more. In psychology, a living being is a computing device, created by someone, which takes a value at the input, converts it into another value according to a predetermined algorithm and reports to the output. It is difficult to understand who exactly created a living being. In theology, the developers of all living beings are collectively called God. But it is not difficult to understand why it was created. An ordinary internal combustion engine is also a machine. It also performs work that has a certain magnitude. To change the magnitude of work being done, need a separate mechanism for regulating the work being done. And it also requires the presence of those, whom we generically call God, in order to pull the control knob there or here. However, if the regulation of the internal combustion engine is tied to the external environment, then in order to increase or decrease the turnovers, it is enough to show the internal combustion engine something that it will perceive as a command to increase or decrease the turnovers, and instructions on how much to increase or decrease the turnovers. Convenient. Because God no longer needs to pull the control knob, which means to be present on this planet at all, the machine itself will everything see and adjust what we perceive as the behavior of a living being, including as our own. On own planet, God has a slightly different culture from humans, which is logical, because God is not a human being, including a different type of mathematics. However, the rules of geometry in this universe are the same for everyone, which means that we can describe a living being as a technical and computational device by human language. We will call an abstract model of such a device a mathematical point by analogy with an abstract material point. Its mathematical and geometric description boils down to several rules. Point A is the point of intersection of two straight lines and the origin of coordinates on both lines. Both lines are directed. Point A divides both lines into two symmetrical halves, where one side comes from infinity and the other goes to infinity. Because the incoming side is considered the space behind the back, then only the outgoing side makes sense, where, relative to any other points on the outgoing side, point A is the incoming. In distilled psychology, it makes no sense to determine the initial position of point A, because its position is determined relative to point B on the outgoing side, and only if there is a point B on the outgoing side, as well as the position of point B is determined relative to point A, taken as the origin. That is, it only makes sense to differ the coordinates of points A and B, regardless of determining their positions relative to the third point. Accordingly, in order to determine the coordinate of point B, in distilled psychology the coordinate of point A is forcibly taken as the origin and the incoming point. In human culture, the initial position is set relative to an arbitrarily chosen center. These will be the points, OD, and OW, on each straight line. Accordingly, the position of point A will have coordinates, DS, and WS, relative to the selected origin coordinates, OD, and OW. Comment. Straight line segments, ODA, and OWA, and coordinates, DS, and WS, are two different things. Straight line segments are physical phenomena and their quantity, coordinates are a magnitude, that we have determined according to the selected units of measurement. The units of measurement may be different, but the principle of measurement in human culture is always the same. It is the ratio of the length of the segment and the length of the standard, so any coordinate is the quantity of such standards. For the segment, ODA, this ratio is with its reference, LD. For the segment, OWA, this ratio is with its reference, LW. Two standards are two different units of measurement, because straight line segments can reflect different phenomena. For physical quantities, with a valid definition, these are physical standards, meters, kilowatts, joules, degrees Celsius, or other methods of measuring temperature, and so on. For psychological quantities, with an abstract definition, these are non-existent, but accepted standards, units of measurement for danger, beauty, yummy, and so on. For distilled psychology, this is not important, because distilled psychology lacks the standards, LD, and LW, so neither in distilled psychology, nor in the behavior of a living being, nor in its anatomy, we will never see the familiar digits. But this is important to us, because in our culture, the definition is usually expressed by a digit. Therefore, the creation of a mathematical point begins with the creation of correspondences of units of measurement and coordinates, that are defined by such units. For units of measurement, this is the correspondence of the selected standards, LD, and LW. For example, 1 degree Celsius, meter, kilowatt, danger, yummy, and any other unit of measurement and the type of space that we measure with such units corresponds to 1 degree Celsius, meter, kilowatt, danger, yummy, and any other unit of measurement and the type of space that we measure with such units. 1 meter cannot be equal to 1 yummy, because these are different phenomena, so they only correspond to each other so that the dimension of one step in both spaces corresponds. For coordinates, this is the correspondence of the coordinates of point A relative to the two coordinate centers at points, OD, and OW, on two straight lines, DS, and WS. For example, a certain value of degrees Celsius, meters, kilowatts, threat, yummy, and any other type of space, corresponds to a certain value of degrees Celsius, meters, kilowatts, threat, yummy, and any other type of space. Both coordinates reflect the creature's resting norm and the origin in the incoming and outgoing spaces. We will never see these correspondences in a creature, except in the form of an already prescribed constant, because the coordinates of point A are considered to be zero, since point A is the origin of coordinates, and the correspondence of coordinates, ds, and ws, is set at the design stage, that is, their true correspondence is known only to the creators of everything living, and without the creators of all living, such a correspondence is impossible in principle. Therefore, it may seem that there is no such correspondence in the essence. However, determining the difference of values, that is greater or less than a certain value, implies the presence of this value, and therefore its definition. Because there are two coordinates, ds, and ws, because these coordinates reflect the distance from the coordinate centers, OD, and OW, because in front of us we have two straight segments ODA and OWA with a common point A, which is one of the ends on such straight segments, because two straight line segments have lengths, which may not be equal, then the coordinate correspondence of the common point A on both lines are assigned by force. Even if the values of the coordinates and the type of space coincide, they cannot be equal to each other, because this is a violation of logic and a phenomenon that is impossible in nature. Similarly, to match the extent of the selected units of measurement LD and LW, We understand that 1 meter cannot be equal to 1 degree Celsius, because these are units of measurement for the extent of space and the quantity of heat, two different physical phenomena. But they can correspond to each other, as if two different physical phenomena intersect at the same point A. And one last thing. Geometrically, point A is the end of two straight line segments, ODA and OWA, whose lengths may not be equal. Geometrically, point A is also the end of two more straight line segments AB and AB', whose lengths may also not be equal. Despite the fact that point A is common to four straight line segments, the ratio, ODA, and OWA, is not necessarily equal to the ratio AB and AB', one does not follow from the other. Through the lengths of two straight line segments, ODA and OWA, is established the correspondence coordinates, DS and WS, of point A relative to the origin at points, OD and OW. And only. The further transformation of the segment AB into the segment AB' occurs through the correspondence of the dimensions of spaces LD and LW, where we, and creature, know only the length of the segment AB, which is determined through the senses as the magnitude of the deviation from the resting norm, ds. Since geometrically point A is not only the origin of coordinates for points B and B', but also has coordinates relative to the origin at points, OD, and OW, the final coordinates of points B and B' relative to points, OD, and OW, are calculated arithmetically. Except if the lengths of the segments, ODA, and OWA, are 0, then the final coordinates of points B and B' relative to points, OD, and OW, are obtained pure without arithmetic. Accordingly, each being, living, electromechanical, and so on, operates with information not only about the length of the segment AB, which is determined through the senses, or any other control and measuring devices, as the magnitude of the deviation from the resting norm, ds. But also information about the proportionality of spaces, LD, and LW, to transform the position of point B on one straight line to the position of point B' on another straight line. And the function of such a transformation as information. A creature cannot receive information about the proportionality of spaces and the transformation formula from the external environment, therefore, such information is contained in each creature initially as initial data. That's all. In distilled psychology, a being does not operate with information about the correspondence of the position of point A relative to points, OD, and OW, which means it does not perform arithmetic operations. A mathematical point contains a definition space. Geometrically, the definition is a straight line segment AB, bounded by 2 points. The first end of the straight line segment is the position of point A, the second end of the straight line segment is the position of the irritant in point B, which is on the same straight line with points A and OD. Point B has a coordinate, x, relative to the origin at point A and a coordinate, xd, relative to the origin at point OD. The coordinate of the irritant, x, relative to point A reflects the length of the straight line segment, dx, as the magnitude of the definition, its difference in values, which means the magnitude of the irritation. The simplest definition is the logical true or false, is there an irritant or not? A more complex definition is the magnitude of the definition, dx, which is the measured or calculated distance between points A and B. The difference in values, dx, can only be determined through another point, otherwise the length of the straight line segment AB will remain undefined, since there is no second end of such a segment. The difference in values, ds, between points, OD, and A is not a definition, it is an internal parameter of a mathematical point, the resting norm of a being. At the top is distilled psychology, where the coordinates of point B are determined relative to the origin at point A. The x coordinate of point B is defined relative to point A as the difference in values, dx. The irritant on the left is defined with a minus sign, as is customary in human culture, but is placed after it, because it does not reflect a negative value, but a polarity, since the irritant on the left or right is defined by a separate name as a separate space. For example, there will be an irritant on the left, that is colder, softer, uglier, more disgusting, etc., than I am, my internal parameter and resting norm, ds. And on the right there will be an irritant, that is warmer, firmer, more beautiful, tastier, etc., than I am, my internal parameter and resting norm, ds. Can the opposite Accordingly, the difference in values between will be defined as the coordinate of the irritant, x, relative to 0, my internal parameter and the resting norm, ds, which is always positive, but differs in polarity to the left or right. Below there is the human version, where the point coordinate is determined relative to the point, OD, absolute 0, the property is not expressed. Accordingly, the creature has an internal parameter and a resting norm, segment ODA or coordinate, ds, the value of which may not be 0. Similarly, for the position of the irritant, segment ODB. The difference of the values, AB, in this case is calculated as an arithmetic difference. In distilled psychology, a being determines the difference in values, dx, through its senses relative to itself, its resting norm, ds, so there is no need to calculate this value through arithmetic. However, the difference in values has a vector, that in one-dimensional space is directed to the left, minus, or to the right, plus, and is indicated after, because the difference in values, dx, is always a positive value. In the human version, the difference in values, dx, is calculated as arithmetic, therefore it takes on a positive or negative value, depending on the magnitude of the irritant, more or less, than the value of the creature's resting norm, ds. Accordingly, the position to the left, minus, or to the right, plus, is indicated before, positive or negative value. Definition is the measurement of the difference in values, dx, between the irritant value, xd, and the set value, ds. The difference in values, dx, is the magnitude of deviation from the set value, ds. In psychology, such measurement is performed through the senses, sense of smell, hearing, vision, etc., which are technical control and measuring devices, similar to other technical control and measuring devices, thermometers, voltmeters, rulers, clocks, etc. Normally, the magnitude of such a deviation is 0, that is, there is no irritation, because there is no point B, from which a straight line segment can be formed, the length of which will be the value of the deviation. Psychology begins when the deviation value, dx, is not 0, in which case the deviation value corresponds to the amount of irritation. Since the definition is used as an incoming signal, the definition consists of at least one operation to determine the coordinates of point B, relative to points A or OD, at least one operation to compare the coordinates of points A and B, more or less, than the subjective preset value or objective preset value, ds, and at least one operation calculations of how much is more or less, dx. The internal value, ds, defines the subjectivity of the creature. If there is no internal hardness value, ds, then there are no phenomena or objects that are softer or harder than the internal value, ds, by the magnitude, dx, which means there is no irritation, which means there is no reaction to irritation. For the creature there will be no existence hard or soft phenomena or objects. If there is no internal temperature value, ds, then there are no phenomena or objects warmer or colder than the internal value, ds, by the magnitude, dx, which means there is no irritation, which means there is no reaction to irritation. For the creature there will be no existence cold or warm phenomena or objects. If there is no caloric value, ds, then there are no phenomena that are tastier or more disgusting than the internal value, ds, by the magnitude, dx. If there is no beauty parameter, ds, then there are no more or less beautiful by the magnitude, dx, than the internal parameter, ds. This means that there are no delicious or beautiful things in this world. This is not provided by the developer, because it is not provided, relative to which value, ds, are they delicious and beautiful, to determine the difference in values, dx, far as delicious and beautiful they are relative to the value, ds. If there is no internal distance value, ds, then there are no phenomena or objects closer or further than the internal value, ds, by the magnitude, dx, which means there is no irritation, which means there is no reaction to irritation. The creature will stop orienting itself in space and distinguish distances, closer or further, because there is no point A with a coordinate, ds, relative to which it is closer or further away, etc. The value, dx, can be logical, more or less as true or false, there is a difference or not, but without the value, ds, the creature will cease to distinguish the world around it, because the value, relative to which there is a difference, is not set. The opposite is also true, as long as there is no point B with a coordinate, x, relative to point A or a coordinate, xd, relative to point OD, then the creature will not know how much is it harder, warmer, more calorific, more beautiful, closer, etc., because point A cannot form a straight line segment, dx, by self. This means that the creature will not know that it is solid, warm, high calorie, beautiful, located in space, etc. in general, that is, it will not have subjectivity, which is not only determining the position of the irritant relative to itself, but also its position relative to the irritant, since the length of the segment is the same at either end. The resting norm, the value of which is different from zero, is not perceived by a being as a value other than zero, because it is considered the beginning of the reference. Accordingly, any comparison is made relative to this norm and is perceived as a deviation from the norm.